Okay, perfect. So why don't we get started now, and then whoever joins, they'll just miss the intro. But thank you everyone for joining, and thank you Shelley for joining us for a special webinar, learning all about the history of your background, the history of PR, the PR Museum, and all of that fun stuff. So thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. It's so good to be with everybody tonight. It's a historic night with Kamala Harris being named the prospective candidate for vice president.
So it's perfect timing to talk.
Perfect timing to talk about how it used to be a man's world and it no longer is.
It is. It's a good time. And before we get started, I'm just going to ask everyone if they can just throw in the chat what city and state you represent, just so we can see where you guys are all coming from. And then in the meantime, Shelley, so we'll give everyone a brief background on how we met. So I actually came to the PR Museum with our team at JMG PR earlier this year, maybe January, February, right before COVID.
Right before COVID.
Yes, and the museum is close to our office because we're down by the seaport, and you're at 85 Broad. So when we found out the museum was nearby, we were just like kids in the candy shop, and we went, and it was just such a cool place, and we got to meet you. But what was funny before we met you is that we had written a blog maybe 2 years prior, which was on our JMG website, and now it's on the Secret Life website. And we had talked about the 4 women who changed the face of PR. And we had said that you were one of the women you think of when you think about modern day PR women.
No, you thought I was dead, which was really funny. And then I got in touch with you and I said, believe me, I'm not dead. No. Unless you know something that I don't know.
No. Not at all. You're our real life go-to gal for all of this. So you're going to give us the bridge the gap between what we don't know and what really existed back then, which I'm excited to get into with you today.
Okay. When you say back then, how long ago are you talking about?
Well, back when it was a male-dominated industry.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, you know something, what most people don't know is that the industry started about 100 years ago as a profession, right? I think most people, if you surveyed your attendees today, they would probably think it's 20, 25 years ago, right? But no, this profession started as a profession about 1919 or so. It's the first public relations firm. And it was a man and a wife. It was Edward Bernays, who was the double nephew of Sigmund Freud, and his wife, Doris. And Doris played a very important role in the PR firm, but she was not allowed to go into client meetings because that's not what women did back then, unless they were a stenographer, right? So Doris was kind of in the back room, coming up with ideas, doing a lot of the writing, but Eddie never let her out. And, but she, since, over the past 30 years or so, we've done a lot of research on Doris, and she is really what we call Eddie, the father of public relations. We need to call Doris the mother of public relations. And that's something that is not taught in the schools and something that really should be known.
That's exactly true. We were just talking about that right before this, how there's no information that's being taught about the history of PR. So
that's right.
I'm excited to meet you and to be able to chat about this tonight and bring this to other people so they can learn all about this.
That's right. There is a tremendous history of public relations. Unfortunately, the history that is written about in the textbooks that I have used when I have taught at Baruch and NYU have 3 or 4 pages on the history. And it's a history of 3 white men, P.T. Barnum, Edward Bernays, and Ivy Lee. P.T. Barnum does not belong in the chapter at all. But Edward Bernays and Ivy Lee are just 2 of many, many people. There's a very diverse crowd of people who were pioneers in this industry. And yes, with the exception of Cutlet and Center's chapter on history, which is very rich, most other people's history books have a very puny history, but it's not the diverse history that we need to read about. So my dream one day is to write a diverse history of public relations with Latinos, with Asians, with women, with African Americans. Most people would not know, for instance, that the first African American woman started a public relations firm in 1957, right? Her name was Inez Kaiser. I just co-wrote a chapter about her. The first Black man opened a PR firm in Philly in 1934. These are things that I think would really be helpful for everybody, every one of us to know about, that the field of public relations, while it was dominated in the profession by men, still we have a tremendous amount of diversity to know about and to celebrate.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And what I would love to do too is, before we get into all the questions I have for you, is first just give everyone a tidbit about your background, because it's so diverse and so incredible. So just to highlight a few things for people, I'm just going to read a short snippet from your bio. Shelley Spector is the founder of the PR firm Spector & Associates, which launched in 1991 and has over 40 industry awards. You are a former adjunct professor at Baruch College in New York City. You founded the PR Museum in 1995, and it is the world's only institution dedicated to preserving the profession's history. You also launched the PR Museum Press, a publishing company specializing in PR history. And the latest book is called Marilyn, a Woman in Charge by Dick Martin, which is available for pre-order as of today, and it will be officially on sale starting September 8th. So that's the latest. And we'll get into all of the different books that you guys have available. But perhaps first you could just tell us a little bit of how you got into PR.
Okay, well, I got into PR by accident. I always wanted to be a writer. My uncle, George, was a screenwriter in Hollywood, and I thought I would take after him. And I used to start writing short stories, and then I developed a newspaper for my 5th grade class, and then 6th grade class, and then junior high school. And I was editor of my high school newspaper. I became an editor of my college newspaper, but I also worked in the PR department of my college, which gave me a whole different, while I was a journalism major, it gave me a whole different look at what public relations can be, right? It could be a little more creative, which I liked. You're not doing the same thing every day, reporting on the news. So then I went to grad school for broadcast journalism. When I got out, it was a recession, and not as bad as the recession we have right now, but it was a bad recession. And I went looking for a job to write for television or radio, and I always came in second in the job searches. So I saw an ad one day for a position with a investor relations firm in Rockefeller Center. I had no idea what the hell investor relations was, because remember, I didn't study PR. Back when I went to school, there was no such thing as a PR major. So I went for the job interview. I found it fascinating. This is a whole new area, dealing with shareholders. It was intellectual. And they were looking specifically for a young woman. They really wanted to diversify in their own way their staff. And being the first woman in an all male, and I mean very male, chauvinist, sexist male firm in Rockefeller Center was a very interesting experience. How interesting was it, you asked, Jenna? Well, I wanted to fit in. So what the culture was back then was if everybody has watched Mad Men, you will know that was it. I mean, I lived in the Mad Men age where guys went out to lunch drinking cocktails, and I would go into restaurants with them. One of them was named Charlie O's, and be the only woman who was dressed like a professional. So it was strange because people didn't know what to make of me. Mm-hmm. You had the waitresses, you had the secretaries, and then you had me trying to look professional. But back then, there weren't a whole lot of fashion choices for professional women. And I tried to fit in as much as I could. I read the sports pages every morning. I could talk about sports. I really love sports, but I knew that this is the language that would help me with small talk. I also would read the financial section of the Journal and the Times. I had to read the financial section before I walked in the office.
Interesting.
And have it all read. 2 newspapers on the subway.
And that is all just so you had some small talk with your colleagues and the men.
Well, it was both that, and also because I had a boss, one of the best bosses I ever had, who would call me in and say something like, "How do you think the market's going to do today?"
Mm-hmm.
And, why do you think that? Did you read so-and-so's column?
Mm-hmm.
And I had to read those columns to be respected by my boss, the president of the firm. And yes, it was part of the small talk, and this is what you had to do as a woman. Now, also at the same time, you're dealing with an extraordinary amount of sexism in the office. And I remember one time I was giving a new business presentation. Back then we used to give them on big boards. This is before PowerPoint. And I had done the boards, we call them boards, with my ideas. And it was to a bank. And I walked in and completely male, which is, that was typical back then. And I walked in with my skirt suit and my bow tie. We had to all make a bow tie. And one of the guys, and here I am with the boards, one of the guys says to me, "Hey, sweetheart, can you get me some more Sweet and Low?" And I said to him, "Let me call my secretary. I'm sure he'll be able to bring in some for you."
Well done.
Yeah, that was a moment in my career, and where I felt like I had some control, but it wasn't easy. And women from that era all talk about those days of being the only woman in the room, and that's why our event 2 nights from now, Thursday night, is called "When You're the Only Woman in the Room."
Mm-hmm. Yes, and if anyone wants to sign up for that, they can go to the museum's website, correct?
Yeah.
Awesome, perfect. So going back to being the only female in the room, did you feel that it was hard to get a promotion or to move up the ladder in the company? Did you feel like those were obstacles that you had back then too?
I think when I got in, which was the late 70s, they were trying to promote women, but still to be recognized, you had to work twice as hard as the guys. You had to endure a lot of sexism, chauvinism. It was very difficult. And as I worked all the time. 12-hour days were, small days for me. I worked weekends.
Mm-hmm.
But effort wasn't what they really wanted to see. What they wanted to see was bringing in business.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I learned how to do that. But it was a very tough ride at the beginning, for women to prove themselves. And I'll tell you, you look back, it wasn't just women going through a hard time. It was men going through a hard time, because suddenly men saw a competitor, smart women coming in, and men didn't know how to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
Men had only dealt with women that they can dominate, right? And you couldn't dominate professional women.
You're absolutely right.
Right.
And I feel like that might have been the turning point where PR started to become more female friendly, and now what it is today, which is female dominated.
Yeah, I don't know how all that happened. And I'm asked that question a lot. I can tell you about when I saw it happening, but from going 99% male professionals to at least 80% female today is something that I don't know that any studies have been done to show exactly why it happened. I don't know. I don't get it.
It's very interesting for sure. I know you and I had spoken previously too, that aside for being a female within the male dominated space at that time, you then had another obstacle on top of that of being pregnant in this space and raising children during all of this.
Well, that's something that men never had to deal with. The fact that there was an executive, forget about whether the executive was female or male. That executive had a big stomach, and kind of looked weird. And being a female, I was the first woman executive in the firm that I was working for, which was by then a mid-sized firm. And I won't name names, but the chair of the firm was a woman herself who had babies. But back in her time, you didn't come to the office pregnant. You just didn't do that. You didn't show your face when you were pregnant. This was time for you to be home, take care of yourself, go shopping, go to, ladies' lunches at Lord & Taylor or Bonwitz. But I had to go to work. We had to make a living. And I have a lot of stories about being pregnant twice. And the second time when I found that I was pregnant, which was not long after the first time, after I gave birth to my daughter, I got the call from the obstetrician saying, yes, you're pregnant. And then my next call was to Bill Heyman, the executive recruiter. And I said, get me out of here. Mm-hmm. So, and that was 87 and 88. Mm-hmm. So the work world in general, not just PR, was not ready for pregnant women to be on the job. Now you have nursing stations and you have we didn't have maternity leave back then. I had to save up my vacation and sick days.
Wow.
And I worked 2 days before I gave birth the first time. I was nursing, and I came in to work with my baby 2 weeks after she was born from Jersey. Yeah. And everybody thought I was crazy. What was I going to do?
Right. And I love to do what you did too.
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And, and I remember typing, this is before computers, nursing this is a mostly female audience, I hope, nursing my baby. And I put a sign on the door that said, knock before entering. And my female boss walked in. And I said, excuse me, I'm nursing. And she says, well, you said knock. I knocked and I came in. So she sat there and had a whole conversation with me about this new business presentation that I was preparing for while I'm nursing my baby. And I said, life doesn't get any stranger than this.
That's true. And then, so you started the firm in 91. What was it like? What made you want to start your own PR firm?
It wasn't like a normal starting of the firm. We raise money. Now's the time we prepare for it. That was not what happened. It was an accident. It's a happy accident. What happened was, by the time my kids were 2 and 3 years old, my husband and I decided, you know what? Let's go on vacation, our first family vacation. The kids are old enough to walk. My daughter can speak a little, my son could not. But we had this double stroller, and we decided, let's go to Palm Beach for a week. And so as soon as we get there, and we let the kids go like they were wild animals, we unstrapped them from the stroller. My son pops the glass out of the coffee table, and my daughter starts playing with matches. They go and find the terrace on the 4th floor. My daughter fills up a cup of water and puts it in the microwave, which was, her eye height. One horrible thing after the other. And then came the piece de resistance when my husband says to me, where's the diaper bag? And I said, you had it. And he says, no, you had it. And it turns out we left the diaper bag and all our diapers at the airport.
Oh.
And then we had to drive around West Palm Beach on a Sunday night and look for a 7-Eleven to buy diapers. And when we got back, I was so distressed. Why did we even leave home? And my husband, Barry, said to me, you know, maybe there's a marketing opportunity here. So that night we sat up and we wrote out a whole program to create the first child-proof hotel. And this was an Embassy Suite, so it's a well-known brand, had, you know, hotels around the country and Canada. And I had this pad. If you remember, in hotel rooms, you used to get a pad. This was a tan pad that we did a, you know, proto PowerPoint with. And I decided in my tennis clothes on my way out to play a game, I asked to see the manager. I felt very brave, and I met the manager. He thought I was going to complain about something, but I said, can I just run an idea by you? And now Barry had already done a logo, and we called it the Family Friendly Program. And I presented it to him as if I was presenting with acetates on an overhead. And the first thing he said to me was, when can you do the press conference?
Wow.
And you know, my life changed at that moment, because he obviously likes the idea. Mm-hmm. We might be doing the idea, and I have to change everything to do this idea. And I spent the rest of the week doing focus groups on tape. We had a video camera of mothers and what it was like to travel with small children. Mm-hmm. Because the burden always falls on mothers.
Right.
And found out that they are not relaxed. They're, you know, always worrying about the kids. Where do you buy diapers? And we had all these improvements for the hotel, like having diapers at the front desk in the same way you'd have shavers and toothbrushes, having rooms on one floor that would have, you know, one of those baby locks, a microwave, and safety things in the outlets, all those kinds of things. And the manager of the hotel just thought it was such a good idea to position Embassy Suites, his Embassy Suites, in a very crowded family market as the only one to be childproof. When we had the press conference that next June, so this was March, and so it was 2 months later in June, we had invited all the travel agents. And when I made the presentation, I got a standing ovation because they were all women. You know, they said, it's about time hotels are childproof. And then it turned out that the president of Embassy Suites corporate happened to be attending. And so he caught up with me and he says, can you do the same thing up in New York and then do it in Orlando? Wow. And eventually we did it in the rest of the country.
So they did implement all of these child safety things.
They did.
Wow, that's wild. That's really crazy.
Yeah, it was an amazing thing that here I was as a mother, and no other person in marketing was a mother to understand what mothers go through when they're bringing small children on the road. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's such an obvious idea. We ended up winning the first place in the Sabre Awards the next year for both travel and leisure and for the best of show.
That's incredible. So it sounds like from there, that's how your PR.
That's how the firm started.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
Yeah, and it's true.
Wow.
So we didn't intend for it to happen, but it happened.
Amazing. You know, that's a great transition then to talk about, so the PR Museum obviously launched a few years after that. But so where did your relationship with Edward Bernays come into play? And then how did that transition to the PR Museum after you started the firm? Where did that all come together?
Okay, so here, the whole story is that in 1985, I was riding my bike by Central Park. So I was on Fifth Avenue. There used to be a Strand bookstore on the corner. I stopped and I looked at the books and I see this book.
Oh, I can't see. Can you read that?
The book is Biography of an Idea, Memoirs of Public Relations Counsel Edward Bernays. This is his autobiography. And I said to the guy, you know, how much is it? And he said, $2.50. And inside was a letter. I mean, what made this so valuable was a letter that an editor at Simon & Schuster, who's the publisher of this book, wrote to the book editor of the New York Times, which we still have, promoting this book.
Was it a separate letter, and was it like almost inserted?
It was a letter that somebody had left inside the book.
Wow.
You know, typewritten, and it was like, oh my God, look what I have. You know, it was extraordinary. Okay, so that, let's say that was July of 1985. And then in October of 1985, I was giving a seminar at the Doral, and next door to me, giving another seminar, was Edward Bernays. And oh my God, how weird this is. And so I went to meet him and I said, hi. Oh, and by the way, I had sent this book to him to get an autograph that year. And now I can't find it, but he did write an autograph. And I said to him, I'm the one who asked for the autograph in the book. He said, how much did you pay for the book? I said, I didn't want to tell him $2.50 because that's insulting. I said, $2. I said $5. So I lied.
Right.
$5. That book went on the market for $25 in 1966. And so for the rest of his life and my time knowing him, he would always go back to, I can't believe you got my autobiography for $5. And that was a lie. But I could never go back and say, no, it was $2.50 because that was even more insulting. But anyway, having met him now, he asked if I wanted to go to dinner. I didn't feel comfortable going to dinner. He was 94, but he still had a reputation for being a womanizer. He was, you know, there's always some scandal with him, with women. So I didn't want to be on the front page of Dwyer's. And I had just met a guy the weekend before on a bike trip. And so I called him. He was a graphic designer. I called him on a payphone. This is before we had iPhones. And I said, just do me a favor, meet me at the Waldorf. This guy who's the father of public relations, you know, he wants to take us to dinner. And it turned out to be Barry, my husband now, who's sitting, you know, the opposite side of the house doing graphics for some show that we're doing together. And so we're sitting there at the Waldorf, and Bernays is talking about, it was extraordinary. You know, Light's Golden Jubilee in 1929 with Thomas Edison and Henry Ford and President Hoover, and how we went out to Michigan and got newsreels about this, the celebration of light and American innovation, and how he worked with Calvin Coolidge, and he was called by Coolidge's secretary to come up to the White House and make the guy smile for the cameras. And so Bernays got Al Jolson and 50 other actors to take the train down to Washington. I mean, these stories that sounded crazy, crazy. How could one person have worked with all these people? And Barry started kicking me under the table, saying, is this guy for real? You know, because it sounded all made up.
Right.
And I said, yes. I had read the autobiography. I knew all these stories. I knew these stories. And Barry said, if this guy is really telling the truth, we've got to start going up to him, to his house in Cambridge, right by Harvard, and start doing videotape oral histories of him. And that's when it all began. So the museum started because Bernays at 101 said he wanted to make his house into a museum. I said, a museum of what? He said, Museum of Public Relations. I said, nobody's going to schlep up here to your house, believe me. And he said, then will you make a museum of public relations in New York? And you can't say no. You know, I just, okay, having no idea what that meant.
Yeah.
And so after he died at 103 and a half, the family called us up to take from the house what the Library of Congress didn't want. So he had already have 900 boxes at the Library of Congress, and we took the objects, not the papers. The library got the papers.
Wow. So if someone were to go to the museum today, they can actually see some of these items and like touch and feel and read through it all? Wow.
Yeah, it's very hands-on, which I always wanted. One of the prized possessions we have is Bernays' inbox that is still set up. Were you there? Did you see that, Jenna, when you came up?
The old, and we're not talking about an email inbox.
No. No, in fact, I've shown this wooden inbox to classes and they don't know what it is. They've never seen anything like it.
Filing system, like you put it on the desk and it's a square box. So you just
It's a square wooden box where a secretary come and put all the stuff in that you need to read. Bernays used it just to collect different things he wanted to have. And we have all the things in there that were artifacts that he wanted to have. And these were from decades. These were from the 30s and on. And he had a lot of articles about Sigmund Freud, who you know is his uncle.
Mm-hmm.
So historians have come to that room and to look at the inbox, take pictures of the things in it to better understand Bernays and how he developed his theories of public relations.
Mm-hmm. And now that's probably a good transition too. So you have all these artifacts and you know these people and you know the history. So now going into the publishing division that you launched. So what was that like, and what was the first of the books that you launched?
So the first book was Courtier to the Crowd, which was produced by Dr. Ray Hebert back in 1966. And it was out of print. And one day we were visiting Ray Hebert in Southern Maryland. And he said that the book was out of print. Nobody knew about it anymore. Would we, and we hadn't, again, set up a publishing division. He just said, do we have the capacity to reprint the book? And of course, you know, in our habit of not saying no, we said, oh yeah, sure. So this is a reprint, an exact reprint from the 1966 of Ray Hebert's book, which is the quintessential biography of Ivy Lee. And then we found in the bottom of a box what you bought, Jenna, mm-hmm. which is Ivy Lee's publicity book, which, as you saw, was never published. It was on the bottom of the box. It was in a loose leaf with Ivy Lee's editing all over it. This thing is precious, precious. And it never got published because Ivy Lee died, 6 years later, just stayed in this loose leaf and was just going to fade away. Mm-hmm. And we decided we had to put it in a book because this stuff is so interesting.
It really is. I have to say, it definitely should be required reading, and I highly recommend it. I'm in the middle of reading it now, but as we talked about before, Shelley, some of the ideas he presents are still relevant to today. Yeah. You see, because it's almost a century later, and the information, it's still the same kind of practice as PR.
Yes.
Today. So yes. It's fascinating to see if he makes it more, because everything was very political based back then, and the news coverage was. So his is a political spin on it, but the core values of it and the methodologies and the theories still apply till today.
Absolutely, and unfortunately, students don't get to see all the things that Ivy Lee did. There's maybe a couple of sentences in the books. They talk about Ivy Lee and Ludlow and Rockefellers, etc. But this book, as you'll agree, is just so rich in theory and ideas. And he talks about media clutter, 1928.
Yes, and propaganda. He was talking about how that affects your opinion on things and you don't even realize it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the whole world of publishing. We published Ofield, and this was with Dr. Rochelle Ford, who knew him. He was writing his autobiography when he died. And so Rochelle, Dr. Ford, finished writing it for him. And this is the only book about a Black public relations pioneer. And Ofield himself counseled Martin Luther King, and he also counseled Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown. So he promoted Motown, but he also promoted Martin Luther King. And we have his archive in the museum.
Wow, that's amazing. And if
Yeah.
anyone wants to purchase these books, they can go on the website for that too?
Yes. Mm-hmm. We actually have a website just for the books. And I'm very proud that we have published this book, which is coming out September 8th, available for pre-order now. But this is the person who made all the difference in the world in my life. And
Tell us about that. How so?
Well, I'll tell you the story. We all need mentors who look like us, who sound like us, who we can relate to. And this is what I learned from having Marilyn as a mentor. My first 10 years in public relations, there were no women who I knew were older than me, who I could consider a role model. I kind of felt lost sometimes because there were just, the women that I knew were in fields other than financial or corporate or technology. They were in consumer products, food, fashion, that kind of stuff. I couldn't relate to them. Anyway, one day, 1987, I received a clipping from my father, who was living in Jersey, and it was a clipping from the Newark Star Ledger, and the headline was, AT&T promotes first female to VP. And I had never heard of her, and in the white space, he wrote, maybe one day you'll meet her. And I said, sure. So 3 months later, I was asked to give a keynote speech at AT&T in front of the 800-person staff at AT&T. And I came there to eat lunch. They invited me to eat lunch, but it was one of the, I sat at a table, there was nobody at the table. It was very sad. I was also pregnant, by the way. And at some point while I was eating, this woman comes over to me and she takes off her shoes. She puts her feet up on the rack on my chair, not on my seat, but on the rack of my chair. And she introduces herself. And I'm wearing a name badge, she's not. And I said, holy shit, this is Marilyn Laurie. And she sounds like all my relatives growing up in Jewish Brooklyn. She's Jewish from the Bronx, but she sounds like all my relatives. Instead of talking about making a noodle pudding, she's talking about making her 800-person PR staff creative and innovative and risk-taking. But it was the same accent, and I was just falling in love. I finally had a mentor. I finally had a role model. And we worked together for the next 18 years.
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible.
So the person who was directly under her, Dick Martin, who succeeded her as CCO, we hacked him for the past 5 years to write this book, and he finally did. And it's great because the timing is it's 10 years since Marilyn died. And Marilyn was the first woman to be a CCO at a Fortune 500 company. She worked in an all-male environment of gray-haired engineers from the Midwest. She couldn't be any more different from these guys. She had no PR experience. They one day decided they didn't know what to do with her. They said, okay, can you go into media relations? She didn't know what that was. They put her in there and they said, do you know how to write a press release? And she says, what is it? what is that? But she figured it all out.
Mm-hmm.
And she was respected because she learned the business.
Mm-hmm.
From the engineers on up. She spent time in Bell Labs learning how a telephone works. And so she can talk engineering to the other engineers and won all their respect. And it breaks my heart to look at her picture and know that she's gone.
I can imagine. It sounds like you guys are very close.
I think she found something in me too, because we had the same accents from from the city.
That when you have that relation and that familiarity, it's tied to your family. It's a natural.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And people thought we were related because we sounded alike.
And there were so few women in the room, I'm sure that it made them think that somehow there was a connection.
Yeah, and Marilyn, and what this book describes is, there are a lot of crisis management books, leadership books, books about ethics that are given to students, but you never hear the backstory. You never hear how the CCO went in and argued with the CEO about the statement that they've got to make to the New York Times. You never hear the backstory, the emotion, the anger that goes into these things. And this book tells those stories. And not everything Marilyn did worked out great. Yeah. So this book talks about the mistakes she made, her triumphs, the heartache, how she dealt with having 2 kids at home and a husband. So I'm very proud that we've just published this book.
And that's available starting September 8th.
That's right, but you can pre-order now.
Pre-order it now. Now I'd love to, because our audience there's a lot of college students that we are always a part of our network, I would love to talk more about that mentorship relationship and why that's so important for people and why that was important to you and how others can relate to that too.
Right. I think it's important for everybody to have a mentor or role models, and it's much easier for women today.
Yeah.
I can tell you that anybody who asks you to be, if you're a student and you ask a professional to be a mentor, there isn't a professional who will turn you down. I'm a mentor to a lot of people, most all women, and I've never turned anybody down. Never. I wouldn't think of doing that. It's an honor. It's an honor to be asked. And I know it takes some nerve to ask somebody to be a mentor to them, but don't ask it. This business requires, as you know, a lot of proactivity, a lot of crossing the line, a lot of risk, right? So get somebody who you can relate to on a very personal level. Get somebody who looks like you. That was, when I met Marilyn, I was in the business for 10 years and had nobody who I felt comfortable with until I met somebody who spoke like my Aunt Harriet about noodle pudding. And I think we can all relate to that. So find somebody that you can relate to on a personal level that is there, that could be there for the rest of your career, because it could make all the difference in the world to you.
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely can. So we only have 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure we get through some of the questions that the guests put through. So when they signed up for the registration. So I just want to start with those, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
Well, okay. So we have one of the first ones. Any tips for young PR professionals who experience imposter syndrome or feel as if they're not qualified as much as their peers? Great question.
Oh man, that's a very good question. Is this by a student?
I don't have the name next to it, so it could be a student or it could be a PR professional, either one.
Let me tell you, I still experience imposter syndrome. I think this is something that we have to deal with. And I think what it does, it makes you work harder and it makes you get better.
Yeah.
And you're never good enough. Somebody who has imposter syndrome is just never satisfied with how much they've accomplished. They grew up probably with parents like my parents who would say, what did you achieve today? And that's the way I grew up. And, you know, imposter syndrome makes you work harder. Doesn't make you happier, but it makes you achieve more.
And you're definitely challenging yourself when you put yourself in those situations, which is a good thing because that means you're growing.
That's right, exactly. I've never heard of a man saying that he's going through imposter syndrome, though.
No.
I think it's just mostly.
Isn't that funny?
It's mostly women. It's mostly women. Yeah.
Someone was hoping to get insight about what set you apart from other PR professionals and how do you differentiate yourself?
Well, when my first job was in investor relations, actually investor relations for financial services companies. So that was a very narrow field. I never took a finance course in college. I had one business course on consumer behavior. So I had to learn all of this on my own. And there were no women who were doing this at the time. And that's how I differentiated myself, that the fact that I could go into meetings and talk about finance, the stock market, treasury bonds, you name it, I could do that back then. I probably couldn't do it today, but I actually took myself to school, to banking school for 2 years. So, and my boss never knew about it. I paid on my own, but I knew that to distinguish myself from the other women who were in PR at the time, I needed to be competent in an area that they were not in.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Now, what truly makes you love PR?
Oh, just the variety every day, the boundless creativity, the fact that, you know, this was when I decided not to become a journalist, because journalism, you're writing on the news, you can only report on what is actually happening. PR, you can kind of create your own story. And I love making stories. I still love storytelling about companies. And I just find it, I don't think there's any career that's more creative than public relations.
I can see that you're using so many different facets of, you know, you're incorporating so many different things and from the creative space. You're working with designers too. Like there's so
exactly.
Many yeah.
Exactly. And I think that it's, I would say journalism is a noble field. Public relations, I wouldn't call noble.
Okay.
But it's really satisfying when you do a good job and you position a company in a way that helps it become stronger.
That makes sense. And now, what advice would you have for students? What skills are essential, and what would you advise them to spend more time on while they're in school?
Okay, so my biggest piece of advice, if you're still in school, work on the school newspaper. Work on the school newspaper, work for the PR department, have clippings that have been printed that you can bring to a prospective employer. As much as I'm saying I got out of journalism, my training in journalism still is in use today. I still know how to write like a news reporter. So I think that learning how to write news is extremely important. One of the best ways to learn how to write news is to read the newspaper and to write like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post.
Yes.
And once you learn that style, you're set. You're set. So another thing too is to keep up with current events and to really understand, because you're going to be faced with clients who are part of that news. And so you need to understand how your client fits into the greater industry, the greater world out there.
That's a great point. I feel like I see so many students that come in, they're not up on the current events. They're more, pop culture is a big thing, of course, but I think there's so much beyond that.
Totally. You know, social media was not something that I grew up with. It is now the dominant way that you get news across, but the traditional media relations is still number one in my book because it forces you to create news.
Mm-hmm.
It forces you to create an idea, a new idea that will generate news. And there's nothing more important than that.
And that's really the hardest part about PR is when you have to create the news
That's right.
and come up with something that's timely.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this is a good question. What is your power outfit?
Today, I don't know, I'm wearing it, it used to be something that looked like this,
Mm-hmm.
We used to have to wear, believe it or not, oh my God, skirt suits and ties and stockings. You could not get away in the 95-degree heat and humidity of working in the city in Manhattan. Horrible, but that's how you used to have to work. And it wasn't until maybe the 90s, the late 90s, where it was acceptable to wear pants, a pantsuit. So when I go to meetings, I'm typically wearing a pantsuit these days, but I'm not trying to look like a guy. You see, in the late 70s, you would be, tied up to here, but today, you can still show your girl parts a little bit.
Yeah. What is the worst advice you've ever gotten? Yes, the worst.
Oh boy, the worst advice I've ever gotten. I would say the worst advice I ever got was from my father, who told me to go into teaching because you get the summers off and to marry a rich guy.
That's really funny. Are PR professionals geared for a life of working remotely even before this pandemic? Working remote is a great question for right now.
I never liked working remotely. I never felt that it was conducive to creativity and collaboration until now. I hated it when people would say to me, I'd like to, I had a guy who eventually moved all the way out west, New Jersey. It would take him 2 hours to come in. He said, this is such a schlep, I can't do it. How about 3 days a week I stay home? I didn't want it. I liked having him in the office.
Mm-hmm.
And now I don't care. I love it.
Yeah.
Because of Zoom. It's just all Zoom. You can go work around the room sitting in the same chair for 12 hours. It's an amazing thing.
And it increases your quality of life because you reduce the amount of commuting time. You get sometimes some people 2-3 hours back in your day, and that's a huge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm not exhausted. And I realized I was exhausted because of the commute.
Mm-hmm.
I live in Jersey. My husband Barry and I would drive into the city every day. And sometimes, as you know, you get stuck in traffic.
Mm-hmm.
Hour and a half, 2 hours, but whatever it is, it still takes time to get back to not feeling exhausted. And I think I was exhausted for 20 years.
I can understand that. We've gotten a little bit more comfortable with working from home now too, and I've realized it's actually increased our efficiencies, and I can have more meetings, and I'm not exhausted.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think it's a good thing for everyone for sure.
I agree.
One last question. So what advice would you give to, if it says a female student, but I think it's good for all students graduating this December?
Have a portfolio of your writing that you can give to the interviewer in front of you. Don't send them a bunch of stories or anything like that. Have it in front of you. Talk about the news. And the most important thing of all is to know why you're interviewing at this particular firm or company. Because I always ask that question, why did you choose to come here? And I hear it all too often, well, you were just listed And I thought I'd write to, 40 different agencies in I always wanted to work in lower Manhattan. Wow, is that a bad excuse? Um, you should know the company. You should read everything you can. I mean, back when I was looking for a job, there was no internet. I had no idea, except there was a directory put out by O'Dwyer's about all the agencies, and it was a print directory. And now you can just Google and find out everything you have to find out in 3 minutes. So if a person can't find out about my agency in 3 minutes, how are they going to be able to research our clients?
It's a great point. It's a very great point. Now, do you think there's anything they should do differently given the climate of COVID and maybe agencies not hiring? What can they do during this time to still stay connected to the field?
I think that there are so many events now that are happening online, I mean, that they could not get to before, which is wow, so the museum has been doing events. We're doing them online now. Sign up for these events, and afterward you'll see other people and you can network with them. It's not as easy as networking over wine and cheese at our events, but also if you're from Los Angeles, you can't get to our events. So this has allowed everybody around the world. For instance, we're doing our Latino PR History event, September 24th. And you know what we're doing? We're broadcasting it throughout Latin America.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and then Latin America is going to create an event for broadcast here. And it's just really neat that we're going to be, exchanging ideas. It's the first time it's ever going to happen.
Oh, that's exciting. And it's all thanks to, essentially, you might not have done that if it wasn't for COVID, and now you've just started to come up with new concepts.
Exactly. No, you're exactly right. With COVID has forced us to think differently. And, I don't want to say thanks to the COVID virus. We've given the COVID virus a lot of credit. I thank the fact that we all have to think in survival terms now. And that means new ways, in the same way that Barry and I had to think of a new way to deal with our children down in Palm Beach when we had no diapers.
Great point. Now, just a reminder to everyone, if you can tell them where the website information, where they can order books from, all the social media handles, where can they find more?
Sure. The best thing is to go on Facebook or Instagram. We're prmuseum.org. Our website is prmuseum.org. Our publishing site is prmuseumpress.com. And one way or the other, I mean, even if you type in the names of our books, you'll get them. It's very easy these days to get these books. But I can promise you that using these books in the classroom today, or when you're starting on your career, it's going to give you a leg up on everybody else who's looking for jobs.
Absolutely. And then also the webinar on this coming Thursday that people can sign up to.
That's right. This webinar it's called The Only Woman, When You're the Only Woman in the Room.
Awesome. Well, hopefully we'll see everyone there as well. And we'll send an email out with the link to that so that way everyone can access it as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Shelley, thank you so much. This has been awesome. You've taught us so much, and it's so inspiring to be able to speak with someone like yourself. So thank you again.
Thank you, Jenna, and thank you to everybody who attended tonight.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Please follow and send any notes or any screenshots you said, and tag Shelley in the PR Museum.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night, everyone.